Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, staff. And I think I saw Naresh come in while you were calling roll.
Thank you.
Okay, staff, are there any modifications to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. May I please, we have the minutes before you from the September 4th, 2024 technical advisory committee. Are there any changes to the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Andrew, was that you?
Yes.
Okay, and motion by Andrew. Second?
Seconded.
Second by Denise. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item 1D, general public comments. Instructions on how to provide public comments are included in the agenda. Staff, are there any general comments that have been received?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we're moving on. We have comments from the chair and other member comments. At this time, I'd like to invite any TAC member comments for items not already on the agenda. Does anyone have any comments today? Ruth, do we have any hands up virtually?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, item 1F, TAC liaison report. I would like to invite Andrew Euler to please come up and provide an update.
All right,
Or
good.
stay seated and provide an update.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all in attendance here. It's a pretty light agenda. It's just going to be the long range transportation plan, but a few other updates. We do have new members, commuter driver from the city of Belglade. So welcome to the committee. Do you want to say a few words or do you pretty good? Sure. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the committee. I'm glad to have you. Some more representation from the Glades. Also, it's not on this report, but this is going to be the first reading of the LRTP. And then we're going to have a break in November, and then it's going to come back for final adoption in December. At that agenda, we are also going to have the draft tentative work program. So AFDOT District 4 will be here for that. And then also we're going to have SFRTA's transit development plan update. So it's going to be a pretty packed agenda. Well, only 3 items, so it should be an enjoyable, sort of interesting agenda for December. So on the liaison report, the 2055 Florida Transportation Plan is out right now, doing a lot of public outreach and stakeholder outreach. They hosted workshops throughout the state. It still has a virtual open house option through October 4th. So deadline's in 2 days there, but they do have a survey for that. And this really feeds into, it's a statewide visioning plan, but it really starts to feed into AFDOT policy and ultimately their needs and their strategic intermodal system plan, right? So it is that first step in that process that trickles down to how they implement projects. So important step. Next is the Ride, Roll, Stroll Challenge. You can sign up at riderollstroll.com, and that's through South Florida Commuter Services. They're hosting this challenge from October 1st to November 2nd. Next is Walk and Roll to School Day. It's the 28th annual. There's more information at walkbiketoschool.org, and that's going to be hosted on October 9th. We have the 2050 ongoing, as we talked about, the LTP. We're going to have workshops. There's going to be an in-person workshop that gets more detailed. Today, you're going to have a higher level discussion, but there'll be more details and maps and tables and all that at the October 10th workshop in person. And that's going to be in the afternoon, following the board meeting in the morning. And then we're going to have a virtual option on October 11th. And that's going to be that next day on a Friday. We are opening up the Transportation Alternatives Program funding workshop coming up here. And it's going to be, applications are going to be open until February next year. There is a mandatory workshop for, there's a mandatory one-on-ones with staff, but there is a workshop that you can attend as well to learn more to kick off the program. And that's going to be, I believe, on October 29th at 9 a.m. Brian, is that correct still? Yep, still correct. October 29th at 9 a.m. Mobility Week for 2024. It's hosted by AFDOT statewide, and that's going to be hosted October 25th and November 2nd. There's going to be a lot of other events throughout the state. You can find out more information on our website. And during that time frame, we're also going to be hosting a ride. The TPA is, and that's going to be with the city of West Palm Beach. And that's going to be at 8:30 on October 25th, and you can register for that on our website. Also, in the spirit of sort of getting into more of that next year is the 2025 Safe Street Summit. This is a collaboration between the 3 regional partners of Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach TPA. We cycle hosting this Safe Streets Summit. It's going to have some pretty great speakers this year, and we're hosting it here in downtown West Palm Beach. So it's going to be on February 6th and 7th of 2025. So you can find out more information on safestreetsummit.org. Other ones have been on our agenda for a while, but there's the regional transportation plan from SEFTech ongoing, some great opportunities out there, and then our TPA newsletter sign up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Do any committee members have any comments on Andrew's report? All right.
Yes, wait, I have
sorry,
one
Jim.
comment. Do you know if they've provided a rescheduled date for the 2055 transportation plan date that was supposed to be in Port St. Lucie that got canceled?
I'm not certain yet, but we'll get that answer for you. I'm not sure we have. They haven't rescheduled it yet. They were going to though. Okay, so they extended the virtual online version. I'm not sure if they're going to reschedule that one or not, but we can follow up.
Okay.
Any other comments? All right, seeing none, there are no action items on today's agenda. So we are moving on to number 3, information items. We have an update for the Vision 2050 Long Range Transportation LRTP draft. So Andrew, again, the Deputy Director of Programs, can you please present this item?
Thank you very much. So we have our consultant here, Stuart Robertson, is going to come up and present this item from Kimley Horn.
Good morning.
There we go. I see the light. So it must be working. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Technical Advisory Committee. My name is Stuart Robertson. I'm with Kimley Horn. Kimley Horn has been supporting the TPA and its partners on the development of Vision 2050, the LRTP. And this process is essentially every LPO in the country does go through and participates in this LRTP process. I don't think this is working. There we go. Thank you, Andrew. And it's a process that essentially guides federal and state transportation funding through the LPO pipeline, which in this case, the TPA's development cycle for projects really begins with the LRTP. This is the initial high-level planning phase. Then there's the list of priority projects, which is the process by which the TPA communicates its priorities. And then the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, would be the 5-year work program. So for a project to be eligible to move down that process toward funding in the TIP, it needs to be identified in the LRTP. It's also important to note that the LRTP is a living document. Not only is it updated every 5 years, but it can be updated incrementally within the 5 years as well through the federally prescribed amendment process. So it really is the embodiment of a living document. So the LRTP that will be adopted in December is essentially a snapshot in time of where we are in December of 2024 with the TPA's priorities and anticipated funding that could be available by 2050 to implement the TPA's priorities. So the process for the 2050 update began in the summer of 2023. The LRTP is an 18-month public process that included goal setting, a public call for projects, the needs assessment, scenario planning, and then the budget and implementation phase, which is where we are now. Throughout this entire timeline, there have been many opportunities for public engagement, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. So in this slide, there are 2 maps. One is the area shape, which is the 2020 census urban area boundary. Although the TPA plans for the entire county, the TPA gets funds for the urban area boundary. So that is the shape that you see here. Also on this map are the magenta lines, which represent the federal aid roadway network. That is the network on which federal transportation funding is eligible to be spent. So roads on that network are eligible to receive federal funding through the TPA. Our public outreach component has included both a high touch and a high tech component. So we've had a lot of in-person meetings, public workshops, focus groups, stakeholder meetings and interviews, but we've also provided an opportunity for the community to provide input online as well with surveys, public comment maps, and the ability to review the project maps online. The TPA also conducted 2 surveys. One was a statistically significant random sample survey that was conducted in the fall of 2023. And the second is an online TPA survey that was available through the TPA's website. So some of the results that we found to be quite compelling on top priorities. In the random sample survey, the #1 priority that was identified by the public was providing more housing that is affordable. And interestingly, through the IIJA, MPOs are now permitted to get more involved in that housing coordination conversation, although the TPA does not have any authority over land use decisions. There is a structure now by which the MPOs in the country are able to produce a housing coordination plan in conjunction with local governments in their jurisdiction, as well as the State Department of Transportation, to try to provide better synthesis at the planning level between transportation and housing. Another interesting result from the random sample survey was the highest transportation priorities. So we had 2 different sections. One was community priorities, which were broader, and that's what's listed on top. But we also had transportation priorities, and that's in the blue box at the bottom of this slide. In the random sample survey, addressing traffic congestion was the #1 result. And for any of you who may have driven in on Okeechobee Boulevard this morning, you may perhaps agree with that result. Apparently the public does with you. #2 was expanding service for people who are economically disadvantaged. And #3 was safety. So you've seen the goals, objectives, and performance measures several times through presentations that the TPA team has made. So just a quick review, the 5 goals that were established at the outset of this process last fall were safe, efficient, connected, multimodal, and resilient. Each one of these goals has specific objectives that were used to evaluate projects for inclusion in the priority list. These objectives will also help the TPA over time to measure performance against the implementation of the LRTP. So there's good news on federal performance targets. The targets are getting more stringent over time, especially related to bridges in poor conditions and the travel conditions in terms of congestion. And the TPA, quite frankly, has been an influential voice at the state level in being able to see more stringent targets being set for these federal performance measures. So getting into the development of the needs, one of the first processes that happened after the setting of the goals was a call for projects that went out to all local governments in Palm Beach County and the TPA encouraged local partners to submit projects through this process. It was very successful for this LRTP. Over 1,300 projects were submitted and prioritized in a prioritization process aligning with the goals, objectives, and performance measures. In addition to the call for projects, there was a needs analysis that was conducted. And the categories listed on this slide are the various sort of buckets of needs that we identified. We built on the work of the 2045 plan to refine the active transportation network for people walking and biking. Included a transit component, a roadway capacity component. Freight is an important part of the needs analysis. Something that is also new for the 2050 plan is the electric and alternative fuel component. The documentation, you'll see our map of the electric and alternative fuel network. Also emerging transportation and intelligent transportation as well, coordinating very closely with the Department of Transportation, who has a TSM&O master plan. Operations and maintenance is important to include, although capacity funds cannot be used for operations and maintenance. The state has a very strong operations and maintenance program for resurfacing of roadways, which often can result in some improvements to multimodal facilities and ADA facilities as well. So we coordinated with the state to understand what their funding was likely to be between now and 2050. And finally, resilience. You'll see some projects that are included in the needs analysis related to resilience or related to resilience corridor studies that could identify a program of modifications that would not only provide transportation needs, but also to help harden the roadway facility against future climate change. So the prioritization process took all of the multimodal needs and project desires through the project screening component, consistent with the goals, objectives, and performance measures, and created 3 different buckets of projects shown on the right side of this graphic. Those would be the cost feasible projects, projects that would be eligible or anticipated to have funds available between now and 2050 for federal and state funds to build those projects. Then there are illustrative projects, which are also eligible, but are considered to be likely unfunded by 2050 through the conventional transportation funding measures. Just because you think of the illustrative projects, you can think of that as we have more needs than we have funding anticipated to be available through the state and federal programs by 2050. And then there's the third bucket, which are the local desires, projects that are currently ineligible for federal or state funding. However, some of the local desires and even the illustrative projects may have certain phases of those projects that are considered to be cost feasible, such as a PD&E study that could be considered cost feasible, even if the full dollars required to design and construct the project would not consider to be cost feasible. So why can't everything be cost feasible? Well, it gets back to that. We have to look at funding that is anticipated to be available through state and federal programs. And this is a slide that shows the details of the federal and state funding that are anticipated to be available. We also work very closely with local agencies as well to identify funding that they anticipate to be available through their plans, Seaport, Airport, the county road program, and all of the details of that coordination are in the documentation. But in terms of federal and state funds, these are the funds that the TPA can most participate in. So TPA program estimates are the top line in this table, around $800 million. These numbers are in millions. Around $800 million that are anticipated to be available beginning in 2030, going to 2050 to implement TPA programs. Now, why do we begin in 2030 on this table? And why is 2030 by itself? And the other numbers are in groups. Well, the reason is because these projections begin where the currently adopted TIP leaves off. So the TPA's currently adopted TIP is fiscal year 25 through 29. So to meet federal requirements, we have to start with fiscal year 2030. And we have to go out to fiscal year 2050. So that's actually 21 years, not 20 years. So we chose to create a single year of 2030. And then following federal guidance for revenue projections, we go in 5-year buckets from 31 to 35. From 36 to 40. And then the final outer band where things are the most hazy and foggy, federal guidance is to use a 10-year band for that final that final outer band. And this is another good reminder that by 2030, the TPA's LRTP is going to be updated again, a major update again. So we always are in this living document cycle of being able to make modifications, reprioritize as necessary, address new challenges that may come up between now and 2030. Working closely with the FDOT Central Office Revenue Forecasting Group, as well as District 4 staff, we've included the funding that FDOT is anticipating to be available for the strategic intermodal system and the turnpike, including documenting their strategic intermodal system cost feasible plans, as well as their unfunded needs plans for the SIS in the documentation. There are also state and regional discretionary programs, funding that we're anticipating to come and be used for projects within Palm Beach County. And finally, the FDOT operations and maintenance. I mentioned the resurfacing program as one example of these funds that are anticipated to be available. So the project sections, I spoke about this a moment ago, but just a little bit more detail here on this slide. Cost feasible, again, is projects that are identified through revenue anticipated to be available by 2050 for federal and state funding, also including the strategic intermodal system funding that's anticipated to be available. It does include some feasibility studies. These could be things like PD&Es, resiliency corridor studies, rail feasibility studies on US 27, things like that. The entire project may not be cost feasible for construction, but phases of a project can be. The illustrative bucket are unfunded TPA desires. It's important to note some of these projects could very well be built by 2050 through the use of discretionary grant programs that we don't account for in the numbers, such as if we're able to win a big federal grant to fund a major investments, that would be great, but that wouldn't be something that we anticipate to be available because it's discretionary. And then finally are the other local desires. So I've mentioned some of this before, but here's just a kind of a list of things that we want to highlight that are new to Vision 2050. Some of the things I haven't mentioned yet are the mobility on demand zones that are identified in the plan, working with Palm Tran and FDOT to identify potential express bus service. Freight activity areas is how we handle the freight component of the plan. Some local complete streets projects as well. Some of those projects may be able to be funded through Transportation Alternative Program grants or other grants that come through the TPA. And finally, those feasibility studies, I mentioned a few of them a moment ago. So to wrap up my portion of the presentation, I just wanted to, again, hit on the project development cycle. This is important. How projects go from the LRTP to the TIP. Once projects are identified in the LRTP, in order to receive TPA eligible dollars, they would need to go into first the list of priority projects. This is how the TPA communicates its priorities to FDOT. Then the FDOT draft tentative work program, and then finally into the TPA's adopted transportation improvement program, or TIP. Again, the current one is fiscal year 25 through 29. And amendments to the cost feasible plan, as well as to the illustrative list and the desires list, can be made at any time by going through the committee and governing board process when there is a need to do so. So we don't necessarily have to wait 5 years to make a change to the plan. Here are some of the upcoming dates to continue to stay involved with the projects. Obviously, the committee meetings that are happening this week. There will be a governing board presentation on this item on next Thursday's governing board meeting, and a public workshop on the afternoon of the governing board meeting that's happening right here in this room. If you can't make it in person to the workshop, there is a virtual offering of that workshop the following day, which is Friday, the 11th. And then on the 25th, The TPA will make the final draft available for public review to go through the 45-day review process as required by state and federal requirements for the LRTP. They will be back to the committees in December. December 4th and 5th are the committee meetings in the governing board for adoption in their December meeting, December 12th. So if you do have any comments or questions, we'd be happy to field those now. And we also wanted to offer, if you or your agency wanted to have individual meetings with the TPA team, we'd be happy to offer those as well if you want to go through things in a little more detail. So thank you for your time. Appreciate your attention to this agenda item. And if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to, Andrew and I would be happy to address them.
Thank you very much. Okay, committee members, do we have any comments on the presentation? Naresh?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions or inquiries. One, we would like to set up a meeting with you with the city to review our project list and to see what the identifications and the cost feasibility estimates. And I have one question. Are there any pedestrian bicycle grade separated connections that have been either identified by the TPA staff or submitted by the local agencies that deemed cost eligible as part of this update?
None that I think are cost feasible.
Right, so I'll answer this one. It's Andrew, you with TPA. Yes, we have a few that are shown as illustrative, so they would need that feasibility study. So that'd be a first good step for a few of these pedestrian overpasses. Another large one that's not pedestrian is grade separation of rail on both the FEC and CSX. That's been part of the Strategic Intermodal System Unfunded Needs Plan for quite some time. That's also in there to potentially study. And so these first steps would definitely be that feasibility study. But the ones, if I'm thinking about for Boca, I believe they are in the illustrative list.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Our new Belglade representative, I can't see your name.
Hmm.
Kametra, is that how you pronounce it?
Kamitra.
Kamitra.
You're on. It sounds like you're good.
There you go. Now it's on. Okay. Thank you. And please forgive me. I'm not only new to Belglade, but I'm new to Palm Beach County. So extend me just a little bit of grace if I ask questions that everyone in the room already knows the answer to. I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up. Feel like I joined mid-semester in class. But I did have one quick question. The projects, the 1,300 projects that you mentioned, did Belglade submit any projects? Are we included on that list with any projects at all?
I don't believe we received any specifically from Belglade other than one that we're now working on with the city of Belglade. And that's for complete streets on Avenue A. We just had a recent coordination meeting with the city. And that's a good example of one where we haven't put a cost estimate in since it's such a new product. We're actually now doing the feasibility study to figure that out. But the product is now listed in this list and there's funding for the PD&E, the feasibility study. There's other products in the Glades community, but not specific ones that were provided by Belglade, but there are the ongoing State Road 80 connectors. There's US 27 projects related to the CIS facilities out there. So there are some products out there in the Glades, but specifically for Belglade, the submittal was the Avenue A complete streets.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Are there any comments out there in virtual world? No? Okay. Would you be able to just kind of go through a little bit about the projects and how that's going to be handled, and or maybe just go over it one last time so I have a full understanding? It seems like based on these 1,300 plus projects that you received, they were put in 3 buckets: the cost feasible, illustrative, and then local desires. And then from what I understand, in participation with meetings with staff, those projects were literally mapped out, right, on a GIS network, and you were able to chime in on it. How are, how are the conflicts being addressed, and how are the, disputes, if any, or if there, certain, I don't know if all projects are driving up with all of the local interests and needs. So that tends to be the rub, if anything, through the process. So how is that being addressed? When is that being addressed? How much detail is going into that through the adoption process?
So the projects that were submitted are shown in the local desires, in the sense that they are submitted by an agency. However, only the ones that meet the requirements of the TPA prioritization process would be eligible to be shown as illustrative projects. So it would have to go through that prioritization screen
I see.
to be shown as illustrative, or
Mhm.
if an agency was able to demonstrate that they have funding for a project, then it would be eligible to go into the cost feasible list. But those were rare from the local desires.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say for a lot of those ones that are still sort of being worked out between different stakeholders, they're most likely, they should be in the local desires list. If they have shown support and they are ones that could be done and they align with sort of the planning consistency for the TPA, then they may be shown as illustrative or cost feasible. But that's really that bigger distinction there, is whether you're on the illustrative list or the cost or the local desires list. So a lot of those ones that maybe larger scale ones like roadway capacity projects from the county, or a few other ones from cities that have submitted, most likely would be on the local list if they still need a lot of vetting and coordination.
And then they would have to go through a set process with the TPA to be able to move up to the illustrative list.
Yes, so once we adopt this plan, and let's say anybody who wanted to submit another project that was either on the local desires list or was not even a plan in the first place, there'll be more of that formal review, and we come back for an amendment to bring it into the list, or to bump it from local desires to illustrative or cost feasible. And the way that we are approaching that is, when you're going for discretionary grants or any other federal and state funding source, if you're going out alone sort of for it, we really would like to coordinate with you to make sure it aligns with, our county and regional objectives at the TPA. And so if you're going for a federal grant or a state grant and you're not in the plan, we're not really going to show our full support of the project for federal and state funds. And so that's how that would play out. So if you're trying to go for grants outside of this process, it's really, you're supposed to be working and being consistent with the LRTP or the MPO.
And in a hypothetical situation, if that local agency had a plan under the local desires list, which didn't require any federal or state funding, if they were able to garner the funds to be able to construct it, that could just jump to the cost feasible.
It would stay on local because there wouldn't be federal funding or state funding on
Uh-huh.
it. It would
Okay.
stay on the local
It would just stay
desires.
as a local.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it would be reflected that, and we need to do a distinction on that, like it could theoretically still be built, right, with local funds. And so if that's the case, from a modeling perspective, we would put it in the model, but it'd still stay on the local desires list.
Right.
It would be reflected in the model.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good distinction between the cost feasible plan and the model.
Yep.
Those two are related, but they can be different depending on whether a project is built with fully 100% local funds.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I had.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much. for the
Thank you.
Presentation.
Again, I just want to extend that, sorry, Chair, we're going to have these meetings coming up here. So there's a lot of projects. We do have an online interactive map. If you can't make sense of the document, that's okay. I look at it every day, so I can sort of get it now, but there's hundreds and hundreds of projects. So if something's confusing, there's a better way to showcase it, and you have some ideas for that, or you need us to go through your projects and how it really shook out, let us know and have a one-on-one with me. So just send me an email and I'll be able to schedule that with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are on administrative items. Items 4A through 4C are informational only. There's no staff presentation unless requested by a committee member. Would anyone like to see a presentation on any of these items? Seeing none, our next TAC meeting is scheduled for December, so there's no meeting in November. So it's December 4th, at which time we will be seeing the 2050 plan. So at this time, our committee meeting is adjourned.